saying and leaving it wrong with the Yellow Stars Show. I have some very special guests that are here to talk about the over sexualizing of our kids in schools in general. And thank you, ladies, for coming on. I appreciate you. I wanted to go ahead and have you guys introduce yourself so the audience knows who they're talking to. And I'm going to start with Miss Rhonda Miller.
Hi, my name is Rhonda Miller. I am the president of Purple for Parents of Indiana.
Miss Rhonda Thomas.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Thomas. I'm president and founder of Truth in Education.
Miss Monica Cline.
Hi, my name is Monica Cline, and I'm the founder and president of It Takes a Family.
And Miss Ayala.
Hello, I'm Caryl Ayala, and I'm the director of Concerned Parents of Texas.
So I want you to bear with me, audience, because this is the first time I've had a complete panel on here, but I wanted to bring this cool information to you. So, I'll start with Miss Rhonda Thomas. It's been stories, and there's been parents who've stood up in school board meetings, and they've gone into some of these books that are being shown where they're actually performing sex acts, and there's all kinds of things that are coming out in the news that are happening in schools and parents standing up. So I kind of want to go to the beginning. How does where did this stuff come from, and how is it coming into schools?
Well, basically, there is a law on the books for 43 states, which is going to shock parents. Most parents have no idea that because of Alfred Kinsey, and I'll let Rhonda Miller touch on that, there is a law that actually exempts the K through 12 libraries from the obscenity exemption. So we have been struggling with that for years. There are women way before us that have come to fight this. This is an ongoing battle. And what we've seen is the books just continue to get more and more depraved. And it is great that parents are standing up. We need to fight against this, but we need to keep it alive, that subject alive. But until we actually remove that law from the books in these 43 states, those books are not going to come out of libraries. So we so appreciate you having us today, because that's something that we all need to focus on. Keep fighting the books. But yet we need to have legislation passed in all these states that's going to remove these books from our libraries. And they're coming in, and they're not going away until that bill is removed.
Wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. This is kind of why I wanted you guys on, because this is kind of what you do. So, Rhonda Miller, this Kinsey stuff. I read a book. I read through Mark and Amber, who did the Mind Polluters documentary. I read a little bit on this book on Albert Kinsey, and he had like basically how many times in a 24-hour these kids can have orgasms from 0 on up. It was disgusting, and it was in their book. So I wanted you to kind of speak to where this came from in Kinsey in itself.
Yeah, I often tell people, before we had Jeffrey Epstein, we had Alfred Kinsey. And so Kinsey set up camp here in Indiana in the campus of Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. He came in as a gall wasp scientist, and before long, he started delving into sex research. And so what they were doing is he was working with pedophiles, and he would interview rapists and the deviants, sexual deviants in the prisons. He was also working with a Nazi who was sending over his statistics. And what they were doing is they were molesting children by stopwatch, which you alluded to, the table 34 that is in his book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, on page 180, where they were keeping the statistics by stopwatch. And in that table, what Dr. Reisman had always pointed out was there was a 4-year-old that supposedly had 26 orgasms in a 24-hour period. Now, there's no way that's possible without holding that child down and stimulating that child around the clock. And so some of the things that he considered as an orgasm for an infant and a child were sobbing and throbbing and thrashing and convulsing and fighting what he dubbed the partner. And so those were the statistics that essentially laid the foundation for today's sex education. And so he was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. So you had a lot of globalist money, elitist money that was coming in to fund him. He was protected by the CIA. He was working, had access to mental health hospitals where they were performing some of these sick experiments on children. And so We even in 2019 we had Dr. Reisman was here for a conference in Indianapolis, and we had a private meeting beforehand, and we had legislators, we had pastors, we had conservative group leaders, and we had Dr. Reisman, and we had our Attorney General at the time in this small room as we were talking about the crimes of Alfred Kinsey and the Kinsey Institute and his colleagues. And we were able to get on the phone one of his victims. She goes by the name of Esther White. She was still alive at the time, and she told everyone in that room how her father and grandfather would molest her, and then they would keep it by stopwatch. They loaded her in the car and took her to meet Dr. Kinsey, and he interviewed her. And when they left, he handed her father a check, a substantial amount of money at that point, for what they had done to her and for giving him access to that information. So the crimes that he committed in the name of sex research are unbelievable, and how he has never been charged with those crimes is sickening. So it's been my mission to educate Hoosiers across the state, north, south, east, and west, to educate them and help them understand we are responsible, because Indiana University gets millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of tax dollars every year through our budget. And so I am glad to say that this year we were able to bring forth an amendment to our budget where we have stripped the Kinsey Institute of their taxpayer funding. So that's one of the accomplishments we have had, but it's been a daunting task to help everybody understand that we had a sexual deviant here in Indiana.
And they have unlimited money to do as they please. I mean, these are multinational corporations, and there's money to do, and they are spreading their money around. Now, I wanted to go to Miss Ayala. Miss Ayala, how prevalent is this in Texas? And you were a teacher, so you saw some of this going on there. So I wanted to go ahead and get your take on how it's happening in Texas.
Well, as everyone knows, we're a red state. Uh, but when people ask me that question, they say, "Is it in my school?" Because I get calls from parents everywhere, even out of Texas, and the answer is yes. The real question is not, is it in your school, but to what depth and how profound it is. And so, yes, it's in every school, in rural schools, in inner city schools, urban schools, everywhere. And so, what we do is we kind of help parents with some tools that we have, ready available on our website, so that they can start a search and find out, right? And any of the ladies on this panel can speak to that and how to do that. And in Texas, we particularly have what we call a Student Health Advisory Council. And that's a committee made up of the community and mostly parents, if they are following the law, that is mandated by law for every school district in our state. And so they deal with non-academic issues such as smoking and vaping and child and abuse and now dating violence, and of course that mental health has been added to that, and human sexuality and other things. In other words, behaviors, values, and beliefs. And so that's what's happening in Texas. And we do have the shack that parents can learn to navigate through and to advocate through. So that's what's going on in Texas.
What did you see in the classroom that disturbed you the most?
Oh, the most, I guess one of the most disturbing things is the fact that districts are now, their whole goal is to change the culture. So you do that by grooming children, starting like myself at the time when I did leave my job after 20 years. I was a pre-K dual language teacher. And so they give you books, because this is what you do with 4 and 5-year-olds, right? Books are curriculum. And so you are reading books to them about homosexual families and about, all kinds of, diverse, what they would call diverse and inclusive, the DEI stuff in the classroom. But not just that, you would also be reading to them books about boys that want to be girls and what that looks like. And so you're shaping and you're forming and putting these ideas in small children's minds. And probably one of the most disturbing things was when my principal said to us at one of our trainings, do not call boys boys anymore, nor girls girls anymore.
Wow.
Yes.
And that is that around the country, we're hearing stories of this happening.
Yes.
I wanted to bring in Miss Cline. Miss Cline, thank you again for coming on. Miss Cline, you have an interesting background because you were part of that the group and Planned Parenthood and all that kind of stuff. You were in that world, so I wanted you to kind of talk about your experience there and how did you see them particularly targeting kids and maybe even using getting involved in schools.
Great. Yeah, I can speak to that for sure. I do want to start though with what some of the other speakers have been talking about already, like what Carol just said, that all of this is an approach to change culture. It's to change the values, beliefs, and behaviors of our children, which would then therefore change our culture and our country. And then Rhonda Miller, of course, talking about the Kinsey Institute, and Rhonda, who is also talking about how it's now changed our laws so that there's all this government support in changing the values, beliefs, and behaviors of our children. And that all started with sex education, or I mean, that all started with education in itself and having public education, and really the Marxist agenda to use public education to change society, to change the culture. And then we see Kinsey, of course, introducing the sexual piece of that. And so for many people who think, well, how can the Marxist agenda be affecting what's happening with all of this sexual, things that we see, the hypersexualization of our children, all these inappropriate things that we see in our culture as well as in our schools. And if you were to actually read the Communist Manifesto written by Marx, he talks about the need to change society towards a communist society. And he acknowledges in there that the only way that can be achieved is to abolish the family. And literally that is a quote in his book of the Communist Manifesto is abolish the family. And then he said, and the way we do that, the way the communists can abolish the family is to get rid of their God, their Christian God. So this is why we're seeing this moral breakdown, because they are trying to change the values, beliefs, and really the morality of our children away from Christian values, which means that we're seeing this attack on children and the hypersexualization of our children. And I saw that in the work that I did, working for a gay organization, working in HIV prevention in high-risk communities. I was trained by Planned Parenthood, the abortion industry. And really in the gay organization that I worked for, not only, even though I was an HIV specialist, my job was really to talk about sex in the community, but it was specifically to prevent the spread of HIV. But because I worked at a gay organization, I was fully trained in the gay culture as well. And I was really taken in as a member of their community. And really one of the things that they always said is that Kinsey is their hero. And they never really explained who Alfred Kinsey was, but they were very grateful for Alfred Kinsey. They repeated over and over again that if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have sex education today. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have the Kinsey scale of homosexuality, or really of sexuality, where Kinsey, through his fraudulent research, not only said that children are sexual from birth and therefore have rights to sexual have a right to have sexual pleasure. But he also said that heterosexuality is not normal, but that the norm of society or the norm of humanity is actually to be homosexual or somewhere in between, and bisexual, and that there was a whole array of sexuality. And so this is why we see sex education the way that it is, because it was to then teach children and to teach society that we were in a genderless society, that we did not have to be under the constraints of a Christian God who has created humanity, male and female, for marriage, to raise your children in a private family, and then to take that family into the community to grow healthy communities and form a great nation as well. And so that's all, there's a lot to unpack there. I said it very quickly, but that's really what we're seeing here. It's not just sexualization. It's not just sinful behavior, but it is a plan, an agenda to destroy our children, to destroy humanity, and really to destroy God's creation of humanity. Every good society, one of our good friends, Audrey Warner, talks about this quite a bit as she goes into the history of just even the globe of our different nations, is that you see societies crumble and be destroyed when sexual immorality is introduced into their society. And that's what we're seeing in our country today. And this is why more than ever, it's important that we really, as parents, really shore up and strengthen our family. And that's the number one thing that I learned coming out of the sex education and abortion industry, is that this is a direct attack on the family, just like it's seen in the Communist Manifesto. They want to destroy the family. And by doing that, they're able, we see laws, we see the schools who are basically saying that parents are uneducated, they're ill-equipped, they don't know what they're talking about, keep secrets from parents, start parenting the children away from their actual parents. And all of that is part of that plan. And when I was in that industry, I didn't necessarily think that parents were bad. But I did, I was groomed to believe that we all had sexual rights and to have the right to express yourself. And so a lot of the times, I think there's a lot of people within this industry that don't understand, because they don't have a Christian worldview, to understand that this is wrong. That it's wrong to take kids away from their parents in that way, or to keep secrets from parents, that it's wrong to encourage children to become or remain sexually active. It's very dangerous for them. And we're seeing that now. And our children, unfortunately, are really suffering because of this. And it's up to us as adults, as parents, as the Christian community, to have the courage and the bravery to stand between this movement, this agenda, and our children. We're the ones that are going to be there to fight for them. And so where parents, so many people are afraid. Sometimes pastors are afraid to speak up on this. They say, I've got a target on my head because I'm a Christian, so I can't say anything. Well, the truth is that the target is specifically on our children. And so we need to get in between them and our children and put the target on us purposely, so that we can protect them, because our children are not salt and light yet. We're the salt and light. We're the ones that are mature enough and have the ability to fight for our kids. And that's exactly what we need to do. And that's what you're seeing all these women on your panel doing today. And you too, sir, you've done quite a bit as well by just having your podcast. And this is important. And we can't do this by ourselves. We need to do it together.
Well, the thing is that when you see these things where, you're seeing in Wisconsin, they're talking about becoming a sanctuary city for kids that want to have so-called affirming care, and when you see things like that, and when you see kind of how the drag thing in front of the kids now, people say, well, it's just drag. You know what? It's just drag when it's an adult and an adult. Okay, I may not like it, but adult and as an adult. But when you start doing it around kids, that drags only have one purpose, and that's sexualization. And if you're putting that around children, you're sexualizing children. And I don't understand where that disconnect happens, but it's real. Can one of y'all speak on some of the material that you're starting to see that's infiltrating the schools, or maybe getting to the kids, or getting into the schools at all? Can one of you talk on that?
I'd love to do that. One of the things that we touched on earlier was social emotional learning. And we have a psychologist on our board, and he describes it this way. Your child leaves your home feeling loved and secure. And when they enter these schools, they're on an unlevel playing field. All day long, those children are experiencing trauma. It's trauma to that child when a girl becomes a boy. It's trauma when a boy goes into a girl's bathroom. It's trauma when they're sitting in a circle having to discuss their feelings and possibly their thoughts about changing sex. So they are in a heightened state of anxiety every day, and they cannot maintain that. So Dr. Jones is seeing in his practice things he's never seen before in children. And that's PTSD, as something that presents as bipolar. We realize that anxiety and depression and cutting is all on the rise. But what we're seeing is coming into our schools is something called agency. And I think we've all kind of touched on that. Children have a voice. Children need to take control of their education. Children are separate from their parents. And so there is a program now that is being piloted in several counties in Georgia, and I know other states, called personalized learning. And I was on a call last night with a teacher, Basically, the child is going to be deciding what they learn and how they learn it. It's further dumbing down our children. And there is a purpose for all of this. There's a purpose, as Monica said, we are trying to remove God and become God. These elitists are. And so what we're doing to our children is creating mental health issues in them. And we're doing that by bringing in all this trauma. In fact, Dr. Jones describes it as when this trauma happens, the blood rushes from the back of their heads, but it never gets to their prefrontal cortex. So it is harming them. So what we're seeing now, I believe, is all the student tier systems that are in place. Every child is going to be labeled with something. Of course, the schools make more money on that, but also it provides them the ability to do more research. So one of the things in our mental health bill here in Georgia is that they have the right to do a universal mental health screening on our children. Well, if it's universal, they don't have to have permission from the parents. Same with a universal screening for dyslexia, for ADHD, it does not matter. So I believe, I think everyone else does, that the programs they're bringing into the school are all therapeutic. We are moving away from academics into therapeutic education. In fact, all mental health issues are now moving into behavioral issues, which what is not covered under behavioral? Everything is. So we are creating within our schools a really a human capital for a workforce. We are dumbing down our children in order to control them, so that therefore we're building the workforce for the future World Economic Forum's economy. And you have to break them down emotionally to be able to do that. So the sex ed plays a role in that. The books play a role in that. All of this, as we said earlier, all works together for an end goal. Yeah.
One of the things that Rhonda Miller was talking about was she pointed out some of the big scale of
yes,
those big multinational companies. So
Mhm.
can you speak on that a little bit more? Which companies, what kind of places are most egregious in getting involved in the over-sexualizing of our children?
Yes, I think there's so many. So probably continues to be the largest provider of sex education is Planned Parenthood. And and it's interesting, anybody can Google their annual budget right now, and you'll see that the number one item that they spend most of their money on is called medical services, which is their abortions. The second line item that they spend most of their money on is called marketing, or actually it's called education. And that education is sex education. And really, that is the marketing tool that fuels abortion. So by providing sex education and teaching children, breaking down their inhibitions and teaching them a different morality, different beliefs, and encouraging them to be involved in high-risk behaviors, really not only changes them, it's not just changing their beliefs, but it's like what Rhonda Thomas is talking about and what Kinsey talked about. When I refer to Kinsey in that way, it's not that he wasn't that I consider him an intelligent man, but he was a very vile man who raped children. But he had the sexual attitude reassignment program, which was to basically flood people with graphic pornography, very vile, very violent, all forms. It was just, and by doing that, he broke down their inhibitions and changed them. And that's what we're seeing with our children, is that they're being flooded with hypersexualized, even violent, some of these books, for example, that we're seeing in the libraries, they go into detail about how grandparents are sexually abusing their children, or their grandchildren, or teachers who are sexually abusing children and drugging them. And it goes on and on, our peers who are being sexually violent with one another. And it's all eroticized. It's very bizarre, but that's creating trauma in our children, as Rhonda Thomas just mentioned. And that trauma starts to build. And it's very similar to what happens when someone is watching pornography and becoming addicted to pornography, is that it starts to change. It starts to rewire their brains, and they become a completely different person. And so I liken it. I read an article that made it really simple to understand. So, for example, when you learn to ride a bike, and you practice and you practice. And Nick, and so now, you know, the saying is that once you learn how to ride a bike, you'll always know how to ride a bike because you've got muscle memory. You know, your body just knows what to do for the rest of your life, right? And that's actually because your brain is being rewired. And so even when you turn 30 and you're like, oh, I think I'll ride a bike again. Like, you can jump on there and just do it because your mind has been wired for that behavior because you practiced it. So we can see this with our children who are being exposed with sex education, with all these mental health programs that are also teaching them that their gender is fluid. They're being shown transgender people in the videos. They're reading these books. They're being flooded nonstop, not only at school, but then on social media. And it's rewiring their brains. And so when you ask about the activities in the school, for example, with sex education, it's not just talking about the sex education. It's not just telling them about a condom demonstration or how to put on a condom. It's having them practice it in class. It's having them role play scenarios about sex and relationships that children should not be engaged in. And so these lessons are teaching our children on so many different levels. They hear it, they see it, they practice it verbally. They practice it with their hands. They read it in literature. So their imaginations are now running. And so this is the rewiring of our children for their own destruction. And once again, parents need to be that wall between that harmful attack and their children. It'll have permanent effects on our kids.
I love how you phrase that when you were using about hardwiring and stuff. Us as adults, we're hardwired. We've been through experiences. We know what we know. We know what to be true and what not to be true. I mean, for the most part, there's some who are disconnected. But when you start putting that stuff before they're hardwired, you hardwire them in the image that you want them. You create them in the image that you want them. And I think that's kind of the point. How is this different from, you know? And I'm going to go to you, Miss Ayala. How is this different from, you know, the sex ed and Monica touched on it, but how is this different than the sex ed? Because there's a lot of, when this is talked about in the local forums, they're like, oh, well, you know, it's just sex ed and you guys prudes, you guys don't want, you know, that's why there's teen pregnancy up and there's all kinds of gaslighting that happens. So as a former teacher, I want you to kind of speak to that.
See, basically, for a very long time, parents thought that sex education in school involved puberty lessons, right? And perhaps it did. You know, for a very long time, it depends where you live. It depends if you lived in a rural school district or if you lived in an urban school district. And of course, the big cities have always been on the cutting edge, right, of all of this, you know, vile stuff that kids are exposed to. That's for sure, because they're often used as pilot programs. You know, they're piloting curriculum, and so they pick schools. So it's been a very, very vastly different depending where you grew up. But sex ed has been around for a very long time. The comprehensive type that comes from Kinsey that everyone's mentioning, it's been around for over 30 years. You know, it's been in the schools. It's just that most people, they didn't want their kids. You know, talking to parents all the time as a teacher, parents want their kids to, you know, have a good life, right? They want them to avoid issues and problems. We all want that from our kids, but they did not know what was in it. Okay, they just they were assured because everyone's trusted at school, right? When you sent your kids off to school, you trusted those teachers, you trusted those districts, and so to be finding out now, of course, those of us on this panel, we've been, you know, advocating for a while now, before, you know, the pandemic and all. But now, everyone knows. They know it's in the details, right? And that's where parents have to be. They have to be in the details. I know I had an experience with one of my sons about a book, and it was not it wasn't a human sexuality book or related to that, but it wasn't until I read the book myself, because he was having some issues with it, and we would call them mental health issues today. I said, I better read this book and see what's troubling him. And it wasn't until I actually read the material myself that I was able to see why he was struggling. And that's exactly what's going on today. So, parents, you were talking about big curriculums, you were talking about big companies, but really on a very simplistic, practical level with parents, they just need to be given very simple instructions on what they need to look for. That they need to know that programming, it's not just about the material. It's not just about the companies that are coming in, because most of them are not going to do what this panel's doing, investigating companies, right? Or having people, very influential people and very savvy people on their boards. They're just sending their kids every day to school and trying to make a living, right? And so they depend on people like us. But they need simplistic instructions to say, look, like I'll tell parents often. I'll say, oh, you have a running club? Oh, my daughter wants to join the running club. Well, guess what? What is the running club going to include? Because I'll guarantee you it's not just about running. Okay? It's going to be about little lessons all along the way that have to do with LGBT or comprehensive sex ed or whatever, all that DEI, all that garbage that is being pushed down our kids. So yes, it has changed tremendously depending where you live. But now, I don't know if anybody here is going to mention this, but even though, and I'll just say this very quickly, even though we have plenty of comprehensive sex ed and all the other materials that are being offered in schools, there are also sexual risk avoidance materials, meaning that there are materials, some out there, that actually teach kids to wait for marriage and are called abstinence programs. Okay, another word for abstinence programs. So there are some, and I want to put the emphasis on some programs out there that can be in our schools and are in some of our schools.
Oh, thank you. That did answer the question. That does help. Yeah, the grassroots is something that I definitely want to touch on. But I wanted kind of people to I wanted people to get to, okay, this is coming from, here's the big picture, here's where it's going, and here's how it's having day to day and how you can stop it. That's kind of the where I was kind of heading with that. Rhonda, you were talking about, Miss Miller, you were talking about how these corporations are in it. What are some of the companies that people may know that are getting involved with this, that are most prominent and over sexualizing our kids?